This map of the United States shows where anti-trans athlete laws and laws banning gender-affirming care are most prevalent. Those are the dark brown states. The orange states are states where there is a risk that the legislatures and governors will pass anti-trans laws. The light blue states are states that are considering and could within the next 2 years pass those kinds of laws. And the dark blue states are the safe states. You'll notice Florida is a no-go state. We'll explain that in a minute. I have 3 research questions in my project. And the first one was about how many transgender athletes are there in high schools across America? I spoke to out trans journalist and athlete Carly Webb.
Becky Pepper Jackson, young kid in West Virginia. I mean, took her state to court over their Save Women's Sports law, and the Fourth
and she won.
Yes, and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that no, you can't deny her this.
You know that it's going to go to the Supreme Court. You know it is.
Oh, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. But now, 2 days after the decision came down, in fact, it was yesterday, was her county middle school track and field championships. And she's in the shot putting the discus, and she threw pretty well. Now, some context.
She didn't dominate?
Last year in the shot put, she finished 6th. This year she won it as part of a 1-2-3 sweep for her middle school. They dominate this event. Now, there was a group of throwers from a rival school who went in the ring and then stepped out of it, which is a foul. They took an automatic foul.
Automatic foul because they were protesting, right?
Yes, they were protesting. And somebody took video of this. And now Riley Gaines and her merry band of transphobes are spreading it all over the place. And you have certain bitter cisgender athletes, because remember, transphobia is the retirement program for bitter cisgender athletes.
It's misogyny.
We're spreading this. Yes, it is. They're spreading it. But do me a
favor. Explain to me why transphobia is misogyny.
Why because simply put, in a sporting context, Carly's rule, transphobes believe 2 things. Both of them are false. Transgender women are not women, and cisgender women stink at sports. That's what transphobes believe.
To answer my second research question, where do these anti-trans lawmakers get all their information to fuel their legislation? I spoke to a 13-year-old transplant, a trans girl from Texas, here in Connecticut, and her mom, Kimberly. Kai Shapley told me that the religious groups and right-wing groups have made her, even here in Connecticut, out to be some kind of perversion. And what have you seen from your experience, both Kai and Mom, in terms of how the media, good or bad, talks about us?
Well, I've seen a lot of media talking about how we're apparently pedophiles and liars and such. Yeah.
And how does that make you feel, Kai?
Angry.
Yeah. Not much you can do about it either, because it's out there in the world and people believe what they read, even if it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And Mom, how does that make you feel in terms of seeing media reports that they're not even interviewing trans people, they're just people talking about us and people like your daughter and myself?
So that was a point that I made just yesterday. ABC News had done a very brief little clip of I think it was Idaho, passed a, trans health care ban, and then it, just said this is the whatever number state that, has a health care ban against minors. And that was the whole story. They didn't talk to any people who are transgender. They didn't talk to any doctors. They didn't, try to say that this is bad. They didn't try to sound any alarms. They didn't show a big old map to scare people. It just was like a blip on the radar. And it pisses me off because people who don't know what the story really is, they don't understand the gravity of it, they just aren't going to hear it. And so mainstream media just continues to either try to tell both sides of a story, or they just try to gloss over it lightly so that neither side is offended by how they cover it. Well, I'm offended by how they don't cover it.
My boyfriend is from the South, and like we've talked about like, you know, moving down south later in life. And that's obviously a concern for, you know, my access to healthcare. Because he's like from the Georgia, Florida area, and as things are changing, like, you know, it puts kind of stress on me.
The third research question is about the science, and I spoke to out trans researcher Dr. Joanna Harper. The studies that I found so far compare men to women. Gender women are not men.
Yes, of course not.
Average trans women to average cisgender women. Some studies, like the women at the Air Force cadets, were compared to cisgender Air Force Academy cadets, but they're not necessarily athletes. They're just very active participants in the Air Force. And what we do know is that trans women will maintain some strength advantage over cis women even after hormone therapy. What we don't know is the magnitude of this advantage and whether it is unfair, which of course is very relative. Is that all? Would you agree with all that? Am I off base on any of that?
Yeah, no. It's a question that's still not definitively answered, but it's something that I've been asked a lot, because it's certainly true that trans women on average are bigger and stronger, but cis men are substantially stronger pound for pound. And the two studies, the published one and our unpublished data, would suggest that trans women are not relatively stronger, and that's an important finding.
Let me ask you about something that is not your expertise, but you're a person on this planet who lived overseas and now lives here. What do you think of the perception of our community in the media in terms of how trans people are seen and how the science is understood by the media and thereby by the public?
In truth, in the UK, there's a lot of right-wing media. It's probably, in terms of percentage of major media outlets, it's skewed more conservative than liberal in the UK. And there are certainly some right-wing media outlets in the US who've been pretty nasty towards trans people, but there were several in the UK as well. And so I'm not sure overall there's a difference. And you're aware, of course, that that the right-wing media outlets, it's every day there's something negative about trans people, not necessarily trans athletes, but there's negativity every single day about trans people, and it's certainly discouraging and tiring to see all that negativity, both in the UK and in the US.
One of the 5 transgender women I spoke to is Melody Maya Monet, a lesbian softball player who plays with cisgender women. She's also an activist, a YouTuber, a photographer, and singer. And she says the anti-trans laws on the books aren't being enforced in Blue Bubble, Orlando.
Some people say that, asking if we're even scared to step out of our doors in the morning. I've had people come from out of town and send me questions like, am I going to be arrested in the airport if I use the wrong bathroom? And are they going to take my kids away? Or they're going to do a lot of different things, which are actually not true in any way. I mean, not to say that these laws aren't terrible. They're meant to scare people, and they do scare a lot of people and make it more difficult. But the practical application of these laws make it so that they're almost impossible to enforce.
And because I know you personally, there was a time where you felt so endangered that you actually decided to purchase a firearm.
Yes, I did. I bought a firearm because it just seemed things were getting more and more out of control. However, I have stopped really taking it out of its gun case. I don't take it on walks with me or anything anymore. I have a transgender flag in front of my house. I feel pretty safe in my neighborhood. I'm not the only LGBTQ flag flying in my neighborhood. And having spoken to things like or people like the mayor of Orlando, as well as the Orlando Police Department chief, I know that they have better things to do than enforce some of these laws, like the bathroom law.
I also had the opportunity to talk to an out trans news manager, my boss at Fox 61, Maddie Cowdell. I get to ask you a question I haven't asked the other 6 people I've interviewed.
Okay.
What is it like being a trailblazer? You are, as far as we know, the first out trans assistant news director / interim news director in all of the United States, perhaps the world.
That thought never crossed my mind. I never really thought of myself as a trailblazer. I'm just doing my thing.
Being trans is like the 6th most interesting thing about you, right? That's what I always say.
It really is. I'm not the transgender news director. I'm the assistant news director who happens to be trans. I think it's really important to show that we can do anything. And that's very cool to really think about, how far we've come as a society, to be given this opportunity. I think it'll help eliminate, that stereotype of media bias, that, we need to raise more, uplift more marginalized communities, more communities that don't always have their say, the minority communities. So having somebody who's in a leadership position is able to kind of do that a little bit. It shows the direction the business is going as far as removing some of the stereotypical leaders from media. I've worked very hard to get to this position. I've worked my way up. Mm-hmm. I think that I'm not in this position simply because I'm trans. I think that I've have 16 years experience in this business. I'll throw it out there too. Some may say that I benefited from male privilege to get to where I am. I don't know if I could make that argument just because I was never a male manager or presenting as a male. I was passed over twice while still presenting as male. But it certainly presents an interesting experience. I've never had to work as hard in my life since I've presented as female in a newsroom.
Oh, I won't back down. No, I won't back down. You can stand me up at the gates of